To the EPRN YouTube viewers, once again, hello. How have you been doing? Still, we are on 7th annual conference of EPRN, which had a theme of economic policy measure to enhance productive capacity post-COVID-19 crisis. As always, you are with your main presenter, Ajabu Yezu Corneille. So, as we have been discussing with many people about this conference, we have Hannah guest to receive, and I think he just presented something by which people on YouTube did so, and there have been some questions which were unanswered, and also some other question aside which people would like to know about his presentation and regarding this conference. And I think this is a good opportunity by which we get to have him. So I would like to ask him to introduce himself and tell us what his area of expertise and what was his presentation in few words. So welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Ajab. And thank you for having me here to respond to some of your questions. It's my pleasure to be here with your YouTube viewers. Yes. My name is Austin Chulu, a senior economic advisor in UNDP Rwanda. And I was asked to give a brief talk on the linkages between economic recovery and I think the environment. So the main thrust of my presentation was that going forward after this COVID crisis, we need to start grabbing some opportunities which the recovery process should actually entail regarding how we address the environmental concerns, how to address the issue of measurement of progress towards achieving good livelihoods for households. In the past, we know that we have stuck to the GDP measure as one of the main indicators of welfare for households. We talk about the per capita GDP right now. I think Rwanda has about $818 per capita in terms of GDP. But what does that mean for people's welfare? And what is it that people survive on if, for instance, not every one of us has that amount of money in our pockets? It's just a measure that looks at the average gross domestic product of an economy divided by the total population of the country. And look at how people actually sustain themselves. And a lot of the people that I was mentioning in my presentation are not really covered by the modern measure of GDP, but rather they depend a lot on natural resources for their upkeep and for their well-being. Then we are looking at trying to be as inclusive as possible in trying to assess the progress we're making in the economic recovery program. I'll give you an example. The current GDP estimates are produced by less than 30% of the total active population in the country. The rest of the population, 70% or more, don't have any contribution at all to the current GDP. So you wonder what they are doing. So what we are advocating for is to ensure that the livelihoods and even if they live on the land, even if they live on the fruits of the forests or national parks or water, etc., fishing, we need to account for that. And to account for that will give us a better understanding of how we can best program, how we can best administer our programs to ensure that they also have benefits from the recovery fund and recovery program. But without that information, they will be left behind.
So you've been mentioning about these 70 which are not really involved in this GDP. So as an analyst, regarding of what they should be doing, what would be their contribution if ever they are they are involved in those in GDP?
Uh, the the response to that question is that we know they are contributing a lot to the total product of the country. We're just not taking care or not measuring what they are contributing. So over and above the formal GDP that we measure, the investments, the consumption of households, the government outlays in investment and in consumption, those are issues that can easily be measured. But the hard one is to measure the contribution of a household in the Western province that is living entirely on their own account production. And they don't have any linkages with the modern sector or modern economy. Those are the people that we would want to see get included in this measurement. It's not that we're going to stop measuring the formal sector engagement, but rather we would want to be as inclusive as possible and add, for instance, those activities which look at the utilization of forests, the utilization of water resources. And talk of land, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is agriculture, but then there's land that is used for cultivate, so no, not for livestock. How do you value that land? It's not a free resource that anybody can use. It has a value. And what we're looking at is how do we calculate the value of natural resources that is commensurate with its actual contribution towards gross domestic product.
So mentioning about the Rwandan development conundrum and trade-off between natural resources and human capitals in your presentation, you've been talking about the before COVID. So what about this post-COVID? When you balance them?
If we take the same measurement, it won't make much difference. All right. Before COVID, of course, the economy was doing very well, and as we heard earlier, it was driven by huge public sector investments, and that was the driving force behind the growth in the economy. But then, if you go deeper into the structure, the economic structure of the country, you find that maybe at most 2% of all agricultural holdings are large scale. The rest would be small scale. If you go into industrial production and industrial development, etc., look at the informal services sector, you find a huge proportion of operators are in the informal sector and are not really taken care of in terms of calculating what their real output is. And so we are concentrating on very few, very well-structured businesses as the main contributors to GDP. But we are leaving out a huge chunk that has not been. And so what I'm saying here is that there is an underestimate of the value of contribution of a vast majority of Rwandans to GDP. So we have to relook the way we measure gross domestic product. And that's why I mentioned earlier about our interest in moving towards gross domestic product of the poor, because it's mostly on account production. So you produce to eat, and that does not go through a market system, and therefore may not necessarily be measured. Whereas somebody who produces to sell goes through the marketing system, and therefore they can be properly measured. So for us, we want to see if I value a piece of land that my cows are grazing on and use that as an input, because land is an input into the production process. So, but how do I value that land? If I left it fallow without using it, how would I value it? If, for instance, I've got a bit of extra land and I leave some of the land uncultivated, it still has a value. But how do we, it's a stock value, how do we make sure that we include such assets into the whole overall calculation of gross domestic product? I think that is quite critical if we are going to start directing policies towards areas where traditionally probably we haven't paid due attention. For instance, We were told today that we need to move people from the informal sector to the formal sector, which means we have to know what it will take to move people from informal sector activities to formal sector activities. And what is the transition going to cost us? How do we direct our efforts towards those informal sectors who are predominantly the main actors in the economy? We talked today about cross-border traders, mostly women, and they carry things on their heads and go across the borders. How do we bring them into the modern sector so that whatever they are doing becomes part of the national product? So that is the question, and that is where we want to work together with the various other actors to try and bring all people that are economically active to come into the main equation of assessing the productivity of the country.
So by your presentation, you did mention something like the road ahead, which means it's still a continuing road to march into it. What do you think, or as an analyst, what do you think is our requirements through that road ahead, and what really is in that road ahead?
I think there's a number of areas where we can actually make we can make a dent. The first one, of course, is the policy framework, and that includes the legal and regulatory aspects of development. We need to have proper structures. We need institutions that can help deliver on the programs that we envisage would be the ones to drive this economy. All right? I'll tell you an instance or an example. If we are going to say we should include informal traders in our estimation, how do you reach out to those traders? What are the mechanisms that are in place to make sure that a trader in Musanze, who probably doesn't know or understand that there are some issues that the central government is actually implementing that can affect them, how do we get the information to those traders? There are so many other examples. I can use farmers, I can use fishermen on the lake, etc. How do we make them? How do we uplift their activities? On the input side or the supply side, we know the government is a major player in supplying services to its people, but so are the development partners such as the United Nations, the main financial partners such as the World Bank, etc. They all have ideas on how to bring resources to the table. The question, however, is the targeting. The question is also about the analysis or the understanding of how those resources are going to be used and the capacities of the target groups to use those resources. On the other side, you have the people that you are trying to help, the informal sector workers, you have small-scale farmers, you have smallholder fishermen, and so on. They also have some challenges. Some of it are structural, others are probably cultural. We were told today that it's very hard for, say, for instance, a Rwandese person to sell livestock. It's not, but people have been forced into that. So you have to understand the cultural background, where they are coming from, to do the things they do. In terms of, because every human being is a rational human being. You take rational decisions based on where you are coming from. And some of them may not economically make sense in the modern sense of the word, but they still take that decision. There are some cultural considerations, there are some social considerations that will enable them to make a decision or an informed decision. And on that basis, you can tell, you combine the supply side, which is the government, etc., and the demand side, which is the beneficiary, come to an agreement on where the issues really are and how you can help them. Then there's, of course, the other issues such as gender considerations. and what is not one size fits all in terms of issues of environment, in terms of issues of gender. In the presentation, I think I try to emphasize that we have to find a way of changing the structure, the economic structure of agriculture. It's important, and as a short-term and stopgap measure to absorb excess labor. But at the same time, in the long run, it will have a serious repercussions on the environment. How do we address that? We have children that are coming. In 20 years' time, like I said, there's going to be a doubling in population of Rwanda. Instead of the current 12 million or 12 or 13 million, there will be 26 million. How are we going to accommodate them? And how are we going to use the same amount of land to accommodate 26 million Rwandans? So we have to start thinking now and do things now that are going to be impacting on future generations. We know that the average land holding size is 0.9 of a hectare per household. Come 20 years down the line, it's going to be half, because we will have twice as much people for the same amount of land. Are we going to be growing the same amount of food using the same technology? Maybe not. Maybe yes. And if we don't have policies that will start looking ahead and saying, okay, in 20 years' time, we have Tanzania here, which has vast amounts of land. We can have something that they will want, and they can produce the food for us. We can start making those arrangements right now to make sure that 20 years down the line, the land stock that Rwanda has is as pristine as it possibly can. It's able to carry that extra population without putting pressure on food security. And that's just one example.
So, reaching to the end, what can be your advice to build back better the economy post-COVID-19?
That is a very good question, and there's no one answer that fits it. What are the opportunities that are there on the ground? I think we have quite a number of opportunities. One is the youthful structure of the demographic of this country. We have a very big demographic dividend in the youth of the country. We can utilize that to bring in new thinking of doing things. For instance, just the idea of transacting on your phone without having to go into physically going to meet someone is already a step in the right direction, because that's where the world is going. If you look at the knowledge base of the country, of course there is ways and means of improving. There's always room for improvement. But if you look at the way the structures are right now, we can leverage on the knowledge that the young people bring to the table. We can leverage the knowledge that the country itself has with regards its own homegrown solutions, as an example, to bring to the fore certain areas of interest and development that are going to be utilized to develop this country even further going forward. We can look at the current state of efficiency in the bureaucracy, in the civil service. We have to leverage that. There are not so many countries on the continent that have the same level of efficiency as this country has. So we have to leverage those dividends. Remember, in the presentation, I mentioned the fact that Rwanda is on top in terms of ease of doing business, in terms of the position of women, in terms of gender equality, in terms of its acceptance. It was even one of the first countries to start saying Africans can come in visa-free without much difficulty in getting into the country. We are leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have so many other things that are opportunities to make sure that we utilize them properly to move this economy forward. We have seen a reduction in direct foreign investments and inflows of capital coming in from abroad, because everybody across the world now is in crisis. But Rwanda is quite resilient, and we can build on that resilience to make sure that we go to the next level. So we put a wedge on where we are right now in terms of licensing rules, etc., accessing finance. We can build these wedges that will then prop the country higher and higher until we achieve the 2050 vision.
Yeah. So I would like to thank our guest of today for his skillful intervention in this UPRN conference, but also to allow us to have this discussion. So we just hope that the next time that we will need you, depending with your availability, you will be there for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as you have been following it during the whole day, it was a busy day, and people have been getting knowledge and also knowing what is going on in the economic growth or other aspects which has been tackled. So it's your turn, guys, just to watch these skillful videos of EPRN. So as I did mention every day, please, once you just visit our channel, don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel. Just click the light, and also don't forget to just click that red bell, just in terms we do upload new videos for you to get them. So let us see the next time. Ciao, ciao.